Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 9x90. Today, we have a very special guest with us. We have Dan Abbate here. I met him through an initiative that will be launching in Palm Beach very soon, so stay tuned for that. Dan is a lifelong entrepreneur who began working in his father's manufacturing business at the age of 14. He started college at the age of 15 and sold his first tech company at the age of 19. So, you know, those like wonder genius children, we have one on the show for you today. He went on to build a 13-year career in mergers and acquisitions, leading complex deals across multiple industries, experience that now fuels his distinctive investment philosophy. As the founder of Cloine Capital, Cloine Capital, Dan has created a systemized approach to both entrepreneurship and life design, obviously because he lives in Florida, where you all probably want to live as well, which he now applies to land development and strategic business growth. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So you say you've solved the entrepreneurial equation.
Yes.
What does that actually mean?
Yeah, right. It's something that I made up, so that's why you don't know what it is. But I'm happy to share with you. So when I moved to Florida in 2013, my mission for myself was what I called the entrepreneurial equation, was to figure out how to build a business that can be not only self-running but self-perpetuating and self-growing. So I didn't know how to do that coming out of my kind of M&A experience and all the things I did before 2013, essentially. And so it was a very revolutionary question for myself at the time of like, okay, how do I build a business that I can put into motion and then it becomes perpetual, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so I basically spent the last 12 years kind of working through that kind of philosophical endeavor.
Okay. Yeah, I do. I don't know if you ever looked at my software company, but I have the Elite Startup Toolkit, and it's the 5 playbooks that I use to build organic marketing systems into the startups so that they have organic growth that's supposed to compound over time.
Yeah. The idea, exactly. The idea that you don't have to be always constantly in the driver's seat to keep things moving. Because a lot of my approach, which I think is a common thing that many entrepreneurs do, my approach was, I should say, that it isn't really anymore. You put on all your hats, right? Like you're starting up, so there's no one's really doing, like there's no one else to do anything, so you wear all these hats, and then you slowly try to like strip the hats away and give them to other people. And what I found is that that's really hard to do, especially when you find something actually like a business that's actually working and actually growing. You've already built yourself into the business like from the get-go. So it's very difficult to remove those hats. So I found that I just don't wear a hat that I don't want to wear forever. And so if I'm starting something or I'm involved in something, I'm very, very deliberate about what role I'm playing at any given time, and do I want to do that thing forever, or do I not want to do that thing forever? And that's usually a pretty good filter of what I should be working on or not working on personally.
What was your first startup?
It was a company that basically sold traffic to Wall Street funded firms, because then it started in 97. And so, that was kind of like as the .com bubble was kind of like inflating. And so I was actually, in retrospect, I didn't know it at the time, but I was very much participating in the inflation of that bubble, in that I started a few kind of websites and stuff on my own. They started getting a lot of traffic. I'm more entrepreneurial than I am a computer guy, although I am a bit of a computer guy, at least back then I was. And so I realized that I was able to kind of sell and create like a business vision better than other computer guys were able to do. So I created an aggregate of like everybody's traffic. Like I put a network essentially of traffic that we then sold to the Wall Street funded firms on a basically a per click basis for the most part.
My God.
And eventually then one of my customers said, hey, we want to buy all your traffic, so we're just going to buy you. And then that's how I got my exit.
No way. Oh my God.
And then about 6 months later, they were out of business because when the Wall Street thing, and everything collapsed, they were gone. My company was gone. The whole thing just disappeared.
So you were very lucky with your timely exit.
Yeah, and I had it was an all cash exit too, so I didn't have to worry about stuff. So that was great.
Oh my God. And at 19, you figured out how to do an all cash exit.
Yeah, well, I mean, they offered it to me, so it was a little bit of luck. I mean,
Okay.
I didn't negotiate too hard. They just showed up and were like, look, we've done like they did the, push their glasses up like this. We did the calculations and we were figuring that based on what we're paying you, we should just buy you at this price instead of like doing this, because they were planning the next 5 years of everything, nothing changing. And like, they were right. It would have been cheaper for them to just pay me when they did, but then they didn't expect the whole world the tech bubble to collapse 6 months, a year later. So,
yeah. Okay. So is that how you ended up getting into M&A?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, my initial experience with M&A stuff was actually through my dad's company. So when I first started at 14, when I started like as a kid, I would say, going and hanging out in my dad's company, I sat next to his CFO, like from like as soon as I got there. Like my dad was like, here, sit with him. He's the, the finance guy. He's like, that's like, you gotta learn that, right? That's the thing you need to know. And so,
Yeah.
And let me just like a quick shout out to Dado, who was my dad's CFO. Dado was a Filipino immigrant who was with my dad for like forever. And he was like the coolest dude and like such a nice guy. I actually consider him like one of my mentors. He passed away, unfortunately, 10 years ago at this point. But anyway, so I sat with Dado for much of my time whenever I was at my dad's place, and they were doing consolidations and like roll-up activity within the manufacturing company. So like that's what I knew in terms of like growing a business was like roll-up basically, And so then after I did the tech company, then I was like, well, now what am I going to do? And I had two things that I knew really, really well, which was like tech and like business automation, optimization, kind of process stuff. And then consolidation roll-up as a strategy. And so between those two things, that was kind of my focus, kind of on the M&A side.
I always think it's interesting to see where people who grew up with family offices end up after what we learned like as children in our parents' offices.
Right. Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting about that? Like when I always think about how, like to that point, people's perspectives on what they do and kind of like what's achievable seems to be a direct correlation with kind of like where they come from, right? Which is hard, it's interesting because in like, especially in like America and like specifically in the West, I guess in general, the idea that you're able to move between strata, like depending on, doesn't matter where you start down here in the middle, up, like you can move between those strata based on how you operate.
Yeah.
So the systems can be set up so you are allowed to move, but the mental side of it, like the cultural side of it, that's like ingrained in you, that's the hard part that people have to work on as they want to try to move between things. Because I even found it for myself. It took me, till I moved to Florida, essentially, again, to get that different perspective on how to do business or how to work. Like I just was repeating essentially what my dad did, and I was repeating what his dad did, right? Even though we were successful as far as business people go, the approach was very modeled by the last generation. So I just always think that's interesting.
That's a really good point that I didn't even think about. Like, because people my age, they're like, what is driving you? And I'm like, do you have any idea what my great great grandmother or what my grandfather achieved by the time they were my age? Like, you might think I've done all these things and I think I'm behind.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. It's interesting. Where I call it standing behind the counter. That's the metaphor that I use. We all choose to stand behind some counter, like you're working in a shop or something like that. Some people literally stand behind a counter because that's what their expectation of their job or whatever it is that they're doing is, like they stand behind the counter, and then maybe they own the business and they stand behind the counter, or maybe they build a business with 1,000 employees, but at the end of the day, like I was saying earlier about all the hats that they wear, there's still, those hats are kind of a virtual behind the counter because they can't remove themselves from the business because of those hats. So it's funny where you draw that line, or you choose to draw that line, and you don't even really know you're choosing it unless you really think about it. You really dig in. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you started college at 15, sold a tech company at 19, worked 13 years in M&A. How have those experiences shaped how you build and invest today?
Yeah, good question. Well, for one, I'm super sympathetic to entrepreneurs and people who are trying to do anything for that matter. So I'm very giving of my time and of my energy and of my network and whatever I can do to help people get to where they're going. If I can, even if I can't directly invest in them for my own purposes, or I can't directly be helpful, like in terms of ongoing way, I want to get people to where they got to go. So all of that experience previously has left me with that, and which I'm grateful for. I love that I get, a kind of a passion from that. And then, I mean, that's kind of the soft side of it. And then, of course, on the hard side of it is more that, like, I don't really get distracted by, and this is just me. This is my experience and kind of where I'm at. I know someone else probably loves this stuff, but I'm just kind of done with kind of like, I don't love angel and VC type stuff. It's just not my thing anymore. What I really like is stuff that I can figure out on a spreadsheet that basically says, hey, if I put this many dollars in and we own this asset and it produces this output, then, this is the result. Like, everything's got to be relatively calculatable with kind of limited risk variables, so that you can say, hey, look, I've got 5 to 10 things I need to look out for, and odds are those 5 to 10 things aren't going to come true, blah, blah, blah. Like, you should be able to kind of calculate it. So and the reason I'm doing that is because now at this stage of my life too, I'm being very deliberate about not getting too operations heavy or taking on too much operating risk as an investor, or more importantly, as an individual, as a person, because when things go horribly wrong operating, somebody has to go try to fix it. And I just try to, I try to like, business engineer away problems before they're like, just so they don't exist. Like, within the business model itself, let's just try to engineer away those potential problems just by the model, so we don't even have to deal with them. Like, that's kind of my approach on everything at this point.
Yeah, no, I get it. I have this playbook. It's like a go-to-market playbook. And whenever someone, like a friend, is launching a startup and they're like, oh, will you look at it? Will you invest in it? Will you introduce it to your investors? I'm like, go through this playbook. And if they go through it, I'm like, okay, you have the grit, you have the focus, the drive to actually implement, because it's a playbook that I can complete with a new venture in 3 to 7 days. But someone who's new to marketing, it'll take them anywhere between 21 and 60 days to complete. Mm-hmm. But if a founder can't complete that, then they don't have the grit to do half of the other things they need to grow their company. Yes. I have one of my friends, we've been friends for a decade, and he has this startup, and he's like, why aren't you introducing me to investors? I'm like, you've had access to the playbook for 2 years. What have you implemented?
Right.
And he's like, and I was like, if you can't get through that playbook, you can't drive value in the most basic places within your business. How are you going to like be a good steward of investors' money?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You know what I think culturally too, like the kind of hustle culture and kind of like the online, like entrepreneurial scene that's kind of developed. I feel like they're kind of doing entrepreneurs a disadvantage, because they're not going into the idea. You just used a term, which I love, drive value, right? We want to put money in and get money out at a greater magnitude, right? That's all we're trying to do. It doesn't really matter what the vehicle is. Put the money in, get bigger money out. That's the goal. The problem is that culturally, in the kind of entrepreneurial world, we're kind of been sold this sort of like, especially for younger entrepreneurs who don't have the experience, this idea that like vision is all that matters. Like, oh, well, it's the vision, and like that's all that matters, and like it's going to get us there, and like we're just going to go for it, and we're going to build this culture. So the start with why, the Simon Sinek stuff, I think is a good like mental game of like, yeah, how you kind of align culture and align everybody, but you still have to be doing the hard work. You have to do the technical blocks and tackles or whatever that thing is to like get where you're going. And that's really what you're like, if I'm an investor, that's really what I'm investing is. I'm investing in the ability to execute, not the, you know, vision. One of the things that whenever people pitch me like startup stuff or VC stuff, or even scaling, because I do invest in scaling companies, you know, because each time you scale, you're kind of a startup again, because you're kind of changing your pitch. Yeah, to go again, right? And so, but in 9 times out of 10, in either a startup or a scale up situation, the first question I always ask if someone's coming to me as like an investor, or even just as like an advisor to help them in some way, is like, do you know how to market and sell your product? Like, do you know, like on a spreadsheet, the steps you take, the processes you do, all the things that happen, and you're asking me for money so you could just like add money to that and it's going to go because you already know how to do it? Or are you asking me for money so you can try to figure it out and you're going to dance around it and all that sort of thing? And 9 times out of 10 or more, they have no idea what to do on that side of the business. And that's the most important thing most of the time, at least when I'm pitched on startup stuff, that is.
Yeah, there's this beverage company. One of my friends was like, you have to be on the advisory board for it. You're getting 10% equity immediately the second you agree to be on the advisory board, no vesting, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I don't care that you have Starbucks like strategic partner and the guy who manages half of the beverage company supply chain in the United States at this company. Both of them are party animals who will not show up to a meeting sober. So, literally. So it's like, it doesn't matter how well connected they are. There's zero, like, who's going to be operating the business?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was like, oh, but they have this great formula and they have the supply chain figured out. And I was like, it doesn't matter if none of them can get their wherewithal together to show up to a meeting with the attorneys that they scheduled. And on top of that,
it's execution. It's all about execution at that point, for sure.
Yeah. The tech, and then one of them, he's like, oh, okay, we don't need this. We're just going to go right for investors. It was like, investors aren't going to invest in the formula unless you have like a team in place that's going to roll it out.
Right.
So yeah, it's you have the operators and you need the proof from the operators. So you have a similar way of approaching it.
Yeah. I guess it's because I've never had the luxury of being like a Silicon Valley, like where someone just cranking money into my pockets to kind of like, oh, see your vision through, see what happens. Like, it's going to be whatever. I've never had that experience myself. So I've always had to be accountable either to my own bank account or somebody else's bank account, or both usually. So that's just the way I approach things.
Yeah. Okay. So what key traits, I mean, we've touched upon this quite a bit already, but are there any other key traits that you look for in a company that signal it's ready for acquisition?
Yeah, I mean, the requirement of the current ownership to be involved in the company, it really dictates if the company is able to be acquired, right? Like, or assuming you're acquiring, okay, it depends. If you're consolidating, that's a different story. If you're going to, smush it into another company, then it's different. But if you're acquiring this company and it's going to be your first one in that industry, in that business, or whatever it is, then usually the problem is that the current ownership, the founder, lots of times is somehow tightly connected to the operations of the company in some way. And so like, that's the main thing to kind of evaluate, to really try to figure out what is the impact when this guy leaves. And a lot of times with private equity, lots of times tries to do is, of course, keep the founder around and like give them a president title and let them run the business and In my experience, that that never works. Like, it's like, because the guy's used to doing what he's used to doing everything on his own. And now all of a sudden you're coming in and telling him how to do things differently, or like where you're going next. And like, it just is always kind of a mess. So I always look at it like, if I'm going to acquire something, I want to acquire a business the taking out the current ownership has no effect on anything. Like it's literally a financial transaction, just somebody else owns it and everything else is operating. Now, a lot of that has to do with scale, depending on like if the bigger businesses, not necessarily, but generally, if you are going to find that scenario, the bigger the company, the more likely there isn't like a total key man issue, or limited key man issues that you have to deal with. So that's kind of the main thing, really. So if you're a business owner or founder and you're looking at like, hey, I want to plan for an exit, the best thing you do to plan for an exit is make sure you're not involved in the company. Get yourself out of the company as much as possible. Replace yourself with people who are better and permanent that will drive the business forward.
Okay. And you now have Cloine Capital. Pronounce it for me again.
You got it, Cloine, like magazine, Cloine.
Like
yeah.
What? Where does this name come from?
Okay, great question. So Cloine, going on 5 years ago now, maybe it's a little longer. Don't remember exactly when, about 5 years ago. I was having lunch with some other entrepreneurial friends of mine, two older guys that I'd been going to lunch with for a while, like literally 2 or 3 years probably at that point. And they said to me, and they were like in their 70s, right? And I'm 45 now, so or will be 45 in October. So they're older than me. And all of a sudden they go, hey, did we ever talk to you about this portfolio of group homes that we own? And I was like, no. And they're like, well, there's 4 partners in it and we want to like create some liquidity for estate planning purposes. So I think we're going to sell it off. It's a great business, but like maybe somebody who wants to buy it. I was like, sure. So I started to look at it, and long story short, I dug into it and was like, hey, this is a great business. I want to buy this thing. Like, it's basically residential houses in regular normal communities, but with triple net style leases like that you get from Walgreens or like some big giant, great AAA tenant.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not Walgreens anymore. They're having a lot of trouble lately, but you get the idea.
It was structured like a commercial real estate deal.
Correct, except in like individual residential homes, and it was a portfolio of those. And so, and the cap rate's like 12% instead of like 3%, right? So like,
oh my God,
yeah. And so, anyway, I bought that from them, and that was kind of like my first project that I did under the concept of Cloine, even though I didn't even know what it was yet or have a name associated with it, because that first portfolio was called Cloine, the portfolio, and the Cloine, the portfolio was called Cloine because the first house that they bought was on a Cloine Street in West Virginia.
Oh my God. Okay.
Long end of that answer to that's where Cloine came from. And I actually ended up liking Cloine because, again, going back to my tech guy days, look, at the end of the day, when you search for Cloine, no one else uses that word. Like, it does not exist. Like, it's just me, which I love. And because apparently it's originally was like a French woman's name from like the 1700s that nobody even uses it as a name anymore either. So it's kind of a funny backstory.
Do you read philosophy?
Oh yeah, a lot.
Who do you read?
Probably my okay. So I have 2 favorite philosophers. Okay, and because I really live by both of them. So the first, and I have a tendency to skew back into like the ancient Greeks and like Socratic and like pre-Socratic, or like that time period. That's my favorite, right?
Yeah,
it's like the most classic. That is classic. So Thales of Miletus. I like because he basically, this is pre-Socratic. So he was an aristocrat and a philosopher. And of course, you have to be an aristocrat to be a philosopher back then, because otherwise you were probably working in a field somewhere, dying at 25. And so like, in order to do philosophy, you had to have like some status. So anyway, Thales was hanging out with a bunch of his aristocratic buddies the other day, back in the day. And he, and they were making fun of him for being into philosophy, because they were like, why are you into this philosophy stuff? Da, da, da. And he said, well, because it's knowledge and it's critical thinking, it's reasoning and logic and all these things, and it's good. And they're like, well, how is it good? And he's like, I don't know, but I'll prove it to you. Like, somehow I'll prove it to you. Like, because they were making fun of him, like, yeah, whatever. So anyway, then he spent the next, like, I don't know, whatever the time period is, I'm sure I'll have it wrong, 10 to 20 years of his life, applying his philosophy to kind of his business dealings. And eventually created a monopoly on olive oil like equipment in their region and became like super wealthy. And like basically all those guys who were making fun of him, they had to go to him to buy stuff basically. And then he was like, yeah, I did it. Like he did it for spite basically, right? Like that was kind of he did philosophy for spite, right? So that's the reason my lead is. And the other one that I like is Diogenes. So Diogenes was like the I don't know if he's the first cynic or the founder of cynicism or whatever, but Diogenes basically is like, it's all bullshit anyway. Don't worry about it. Like, I'm just going to like anything that has to do with like all these things that you would worry about. I'm just going to go live in a barrel on the street and like hang out. Like his whole, like, that's what life is about. It's just living in a barrel, hanging out and being like chill. Right. That was basically Diogenes' approach. And so he became super famous by being super, with that super kind of chill mentality of like, it's all meaningless anyway. So like, just hang out and have a nice life. To the point where he had like, different other aristocrats and other kind of like, royalty folks seeking his counsel on how to live that kind of life or whatever. And so I like those two specifically as like a internal philosophy, like for myself, because one was for like, use philosophy in total application for like to create a business and like grow your wealth. And the other one was like, it doesn't really matter anyway. Who cares? Right. That's kind of like, so I think I have created a life for myself and an approach for myself that really kind of like embodies both of those things, which keeps me very comfortably moving forward, I guess is a good way to say it,
Yeah.
How about you? What do you read any specific philosophy?
Yeah. So, some people don't consider Emerson a philosopher. If you do, I like his work. I loved how I was reading Kierkegaard and Socrates a lot last year. There was an international smear campaign that a few people tried to do, not realizing the depth of my international connections. Because you don't flex in every room you go into.
Right.
And so they got in a lot of trouble for it with at an international level. But at the time I was like so upset that people would try to take these punches at me and like set up this smear campaign. And so I turned to Socrates and Kierkegaard, and I loved being able to read what they went through. And I was like, it hasn't changed. Like in thousands of years, people still do this. So it was like very comforting to me to like see these old dudes that we now like look up to thousands of years later went through the same exact thing when they were around the same age. I thought it was really funny. There was one point where Socrates was having to deal with these people, and he's like, well, I was in conference with the gods and they say you're wrong. I was like, let me get this straight. So this guy that we now study as a genius made up a few extra gods, claimed he was in conference with them, and that was the power play he came back with. Like, this guy is next level genius. Like, it's like, damn, well played, Socrates, well played.
That's why I love philosophy so much as a genre, I guess you could say, or whatever, is because it's all the same for 2,000, 3,000 years. There's no difference. Like, you can go read all that. All the answers are in those books, in the things that people are, and I love how there's the way that philosophy works specifically. And I guess this is true of academics in general, sort of, in lots of disciplines, but the philosophers are having a conversation over time, right? It only moves in one direction because one guy dies and then the other guy responds to it. So the guy who died can't respond back, but it kind of moves forward in time with one kind of responding to the next, responding to the next, responding to the next. And it's just an interesting thing to think about as like a human, that it's like we're figuring out what this kind of process of being human is and like dealing with all these things are. And we know the answer because we've had enough time go by. Or like not the answer, but like the way to like apply it in your life. There's obviously the Stoicism stuff has really taken off online over the last bunch of years. And honestly, that's great. I think Stoicism is awesome. And that's just one example of kind of like different, like how to have a good life or how to accomplish what you want to accomplish, which is it's all in this philosophy stuff. And, at the end of the day, Socrates, as an example, Socrates died because his people wanted to take him away, right? He was executed, right? And even the people who were going to execute him were like, hey, Socrates, it's totally cool. If you split tonight and you're not in your cell tomorrow, like, we're not going to like chase you. Like, you're fine, whatever, you know? And he didn't run because his theory was that he so believed in the, like, kind of the social system, the societal system that was essentially persecuting him. He so much believed in it that he wanted to, like, it decided this is what's supposed to happen. He's supposed to die. So he did. Like, that was his commitment to what he was doing. Now, some people argue that he was already so old that he probably already, like, was maybe on the way out anyway. Who knows historically? But yeah, that's the commitment of those of people to, like, if you really think about it, it's the same process repeating over and over and over again in all of our lives. It's interesting.
I forget that Stoicism is considered philosophy. In our family, growing up in New York City, that's why when you were like, you're from Chicago, I was like, okay, I have to defrost my New York City, like, ice shell because we're all born with it. My mother found pictures from my 7th birthday where I had a bunch of girlfriends over and we were learning, like, how to be stoic and have a serious tea party. And we were 7 and we're all sitting there with these books on our heads because we learned to walk balancing a book on our head. And we all had the Slavic smile, like the no teeth, like, I am the daughter of going to run an empire one day smile. And I was just like, so one of my friends we call him the hot CRE Yoda. He's like the older brother in our, like, commercial real estate bubble. He's like, Adi, you need to get into Carl Jung. You need to get into Carl Jung. So I've been learning Carl Jung slowly through Eric Brody. He came on the show a couple episodes ago. So I guess, yeah, I'm just starting to get into his stuff. I haven't read any of his stuff, but every once in a while, like, I'll face something and I'll call up Brody and I'm like, hey, what would you do? Or what would Carl Jung say to this? And he's like, I would say this and Carl Jung would say this.
You know what's great? You know what's actually great about this now with ChatGPT or any of the AIs, I'm sure, you can have conversation because it's read all the text, right? It knows all the stuff. So you can have a conversation, and just like you just said, what would Socrates, I'm in this situation. What do you think Socrates would say about this? What would Plato say about that? What would, whoever, Benjamin say about that? Whatever. Like, you could come up with all these different philosophers and get their quote unquote perspective on whatever your current problem is. And I think that's kind of an interesting, again, with that idea that the conversation is happening over time. Now you've got that conversation in, like, real time, be able to be applied to what's going on, which is actually kind of a shift in kind of the philosophical tradition, I guess, that now we can kind of operate like that and ask those kinds of questions. When I'm doing my philosophy stuff at the University of Edinburgh right now, I do that a lot with stuff like that we're reading with different texts. I'll read all the texts first, just reading them, sit there, read them. Then I'll start to have a conversation with ChatGPT as if ChatGPT is another student. And we would, like, chit chat back and forth. And what do you think about this? And talk. And then from that, it kind of really solidifies what I read for me. Like, so I can really kind of understand it better because I actually had a conversation about it with somebody who theoretically, of course, ChatGPT makes mistakes, but theoretically has probably a better grasp on it than another student who would have just read it one time, right? So.
But ChatGPT doesn't give me the hard truths when I need them. Like, it always approaches me with
it's too positive. That's true.
Whereas, like, one of my godfathers will be like, yes, that happened to you. You got stabbed in the back. At least you didn't lose XYZ. Did any of these things change? No. Okay, so you need to be in this meeting tomorrow morning, and several thousand people are depending on you being focused. Snap out of it.
Right.
Like, ChatGPT would never say that to me. Never. My godfather will call me up and say that.
That's good. Yeah, that's actually great Stoic advice that you just gave there, because the Stoicism sort of perspective is that things happen and you assign the value to them, right? So you can assign the value and be like, oh, that ruined my day because it was so bad, blah, blah, blah. Or it's just like, hey, it's another thing that happened. I need to control my reaction to it, my emotions related to it, because it doesn't do me any good to get upset about it. And, like, that's the thing where Stoicism previously, I think it's better in culture now, but previously that's where people didn't understand because they thought stoicism was more like a Mr. Spock, you know, like no emotions and like, oh, I'm just like burying all my emotions. It's not burying your emotions. It's like not even reacting to. It's like, okay, I'm not going to react to that. It's just a thing that happened. Like I can get upset about it, or I can just work through it. Either way, I have to work through it. So I might as well work through it without the emotional baggage, right? So
that's where I really love bringing Carl Jung into Stoicism, because with Stoicism, before Brody started teaching me explaining these different concepts to me, and then I actually went to ChatGPT for some of them as well. I would just be like, okay, I have to suck this up and I have to pretend it didn't hurt. Like getting stabbed in the back by this person didn't hurt as much as it did. But you can only bury so many betrayals before like it turns you into like someone who's drinking whiskey every night, which is just bad for your liver. So then you have Carl Jung, who's like, okay, this is how you're going to process it so that you can get over it in 15 minutes and then go back.
There you go.
Yeah, that's kind of, I don't know, that's where I am. We totally got off track. So
let's go back to it.
So this is what happens when you take two people who are on the investor side, worked in tech, and get them talking philosophy. Sorry. This is what happens every time I go to California. I have, like, my friends and I spend the entire time in conversations like this. But all right, so what makes your approach to land development with Cloine Capital different than traditional models?
Well, I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know if it's really different. I can say some of the things that I think are interesting about it. One, we draw a lot of our investor capital from other entrepreneurs, other people who are operating people like me who come from that background and don't and like me haven't had access to the kind of the land development world previously, and so this is a good way for them to kind of get into the business without actually getting into the business, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things. And then as far as look, what I learned about the land development business when I got into it a few years ago was that it's just a big manufacturing process, right? It just the output happens to be a house on a lot, a single family or townhouse, whatever. And because it's just a house on a lot, you need raw materials. Okay, so what do you need? Well, you need the lot to put it on. Okay, what do you need to put on the lot? Well, you need all the,
permits and approvals,
utilities and all that, and then before that, the permits and all that, and then you need the land before that. So we know that the big builders really, just like you would in manufacturing, the big builders are essentially they want just-in-time delivery of lots. That's really what it comes down to, especially since 2008. They want just-in-time delivery so that they can just focus on building a vertical house, and they can control the time essentially that their capital is kind of like stuck either in land or stuck in some port in the process. They want to control all that for time. They operate kind of like a bank in that regard. They want everything to be dialed in, as anyone would. So I think our opportunity, what we saw as people who are pretty what's the word, more entrepreneurial, able to deal with a lot more variables than somebody else. We can do that just-in-time delivery really well for our builders who ultimately take it from us after either all the permits and then they'll do all the horizontal development themselves, so the actual construction, or we'll go through horizontal construction as well, and then we'll deliver them finished lots so they can just go vertical immediately. So that's and what I love about that business is the scale is big right away. Like we're not doing like 30 house developments. Like on the low side, we're looking at like 250, 300 units is the low end, and beyond that, 800, 1,000 plus is kind of like a good sweet spot for us, or even higher. It just depends on what the opportunity looks like.
Where are you buying land?
Yeah, that's a good question. Most of the land deals that we've done up to this point have come in either from the builders themselves who've identified locations that they want to be at, and they bring us deals and they say, hey, we found this property. We've already been talking to the seller, but we want someone to
take it through approvals.
Yep, go through the process.
Yep.
That's kind of a mixed bag of is that a good deal or not? Because sometimes the builders getting in the conversation that early have already identified kind of what they want it to be, and so they have expectations of how much you're gonna they want you to deliver for, which may or may not be realistic depending. So it's either them bringing us the deal, or frankly, It's really just been through our network. It's been either through the land acquisition guys at the builders and kind of like their extended network, or me just kind of bumping into people or people in our team, literally just going to events and kind of like backing into somebody who it's not really their business, but they own a nice piece of land in a particular place and they know it has value, but they don't know what to do with it. Those are like kind of great opportunities because, just because the person knows they're not like a seller who's like, oh, I never want to leave this land because it's my family's land and blah, blah, blah. So they're not emotionally connected to it, but they're ready to do something with it. They just don't know what to do and they want to kind of move it out, so.
Wait, do you know the family land that owns the company, land acquisition guys?
No.
Oh, okay. I'll introduce you to him at the event next week.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
Yeah. He's
wait, so they work through the process of dealing with the families to get to where raw land.
Their family has owned farmland throughout the entire Midwest, the Midwest column for 200 years.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, they own a ton of farmland.
Yeah.
In the Midwest. And then you'll also meet. Oh no, you already met Mario.
Yeah, I know Mario. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm making him fly to New York next week.
Coming too? Okay, good. I'll get to see you. Awesome.
I loved how everyone was like, "Why is Mario here?" And I was like, "I made him come."
Yeah, that was good.
You'll notice in our little bubble, like for the next gen, like we make each other come with us to events because our parents are industry titans who are taking over some part of the world. So yeah, your friends are the family you choose.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my friends was like, I need you to dress as like, okay, so you saw me at the meeting last week. I was like in serious professional attire. And then for 9x90, I have to be in like this sparkly leotard. And she was like, I need you at the event next week signing books and wearing your sparkly leotard. And it was like, hell no. And then Mario was like, I will fly up and go to the event with you. And I was like, that's better than having like 5 bodyguards. Okay, yeah, I'll be there.
Awesome. I like to. As you saw in the meeting when I was there, I have my official uniform, which is a Lululemon shirt. Here is Lululemon, and then on the bottom on my shorts, I have Volcom shorts, and I have basically that variation in a couple different colors, and that's my uniform. I of course have a polo shirt when I need one, or a jacket if I need one, but I try to stay out of it as much as possible. So
yeah. Oh, funny. Yeah. But okay, so you're raising for this land development business right now.
Correct. Yeah.
What I thought was brilliant with your pitch is, and I always try to explain this to friends who are not investing in real estate, how I can't just take money whenever they want. Like the fund can't just take money whenever they want, because we have to, in real estate, you have to do a cash return quarterly or monthly. And whereas like with regular VC, you can just take the lump sum whenever and deploy it whenever. Right. And you explained that on your website.
Right. Yeah.
You're like,
yeah. Most of the deals that we do have a cash flow component associated with them. The land stuff, it depends on the deal it depends on which we call them verticals, which vertical you're going into. Because some people don't want the monthly cash flow. It's generally monthly, quarterly, or on some sort of time frame for us.
Yeah.
And so depending on what deal they're into and what they want, because some people like the monthly cash flow because they want to like live in it or reinvest it or whatever. And then other people are like, you know what? If you can hold on to this and like grow the value over a 3-year period, and we don't usually go, like our target is like 2 to 3 years maximum in a scenario like that. And they don't have to deal with taxes or like having to like, hey, I'm taking, it just depends on the investor and what they're kind of trying to accomplish. Some people like it either way. Yeah.
No, I have a friend. He only does capital preservation in real estate. So I'll take something where I see like a very easy value add, take the building, max out tenants, renovate whatever we need. And then I turn to him and I'm like, hey, Scott, do your Houston guys want this now that it's just cash preservation? Not because they don't want the cash flow.
Okay. Exactly. Yeah. That's a great resource for that. And then we're kind of doing the same thing because like on our hard money business, where we'll do hard money loans and stuff for fix and flippers and things like that. Obviously, that's more of a cash flow focused business. You know, like we make the investment. You know, they pay us, you know, whatever monthly, and then we can pay the investors monthly. Like it's very simple, very clean. So anyway, yeah.
Your hard money business, how big is that fund?
We're at about 20 million right now.
I have someone I should introduce you to. So I actually, we were looking at adding that as another asset we acquire, but then it was just like too much because we'd have to bring too many people inside. And so I'd rather focus on one goal and hit it well than try to focus on three and miss all of them. But there's someone who has a really, really unique structure for hard money play in Puerto Rico.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we're definitely scaling that business as well. What we're trying to do is like, that's just the equity that I made a reference to. And so what we're trying to do with that is look for the opportunity to now really scale up the turns, because the things that we're investing in, their first position mortgages, and they're usually only a 6-month term. They're usually like done really quick. And so what we want to be able to do is find like essentially somebody who's more like the, you know, capital preservation, cash preservation guy, like you mentioned, so that we can essentially like originate, maybe take some points and then sell the deal to the kind of like a Fannie Freddie type relationship, but on the hard money side, because that way then we can take that same capital and just kind of keep turning it, as opposed to having to wait the 6 months and then we get the money back and then redeploy. So we can really focus on marketing and growing it, because at this point we've always got more demand than we have capital. Because and actually on the other side too, we want to grow that business in some interesting ways. We really like to be up at 100 million, either in terms of actual deployed equity, or if I could, like this turning process, like I said, if we can, instead of turning it twice a year, if we could turn it, you know, 4 times a year or 5 times a year, that, you know,
that would be great. Yeah. All right. So looking back on everything we've discussed, your whole life, what are a few major lessons or adjustments you'd recommend to someone starting out with their first private equity fund?
This is the same recommendation I would make anyone starting any business, is don't start a business or don't put yourself into a role in the business that you aren't really the best at.
Yeah.
We have a tendency, I always use this example. If you're going to build a house, us entrepreneurs and us finance people, if we're going to build a house, we hire an architect, we hire an engineer, we hire the guy to do the zoning, we hire the plumber, the electrician, the drywaller, with the painter. We hire all these people and they build us a house. But for some reason, when we start a business, we think we can be the architect, the engineer, the plumber, the electrician. We do all those things ourselves, again, because the kind of entrepreneurial culture sort of tells us that we can do those things. And we're not very good at them. Most of the things we're not very good at. We don't even necessarily like those things. We're doing it because it's a quote unquote necessity. So my point is just be aware when you are kind of sticking yourself into a role because you're just like, you know, putting out fires, or you're being too much of a cowboy about it. You really should just be like, you know what? This is what I do now. Unless it's like totally like dire, like the whole world is going to end. If something isn't getting done that needs to get done, and the option is just let it not get done, or I jump in, I just kind of let it not get done, because it allows, but by not letting it get done, by not doing it, I can then stay focused on actually solving the problem so it's permanently solved. If I go in and do the thing myself, now it's not a permanent solution. Now it's I'm only going to do it until I get out of it, right? So it just keeps me focused on actually like truly solving the problem, as opposed to band-aiding it with my own, you know, blood, sweat, and tears. So that's my suggestion to anybody who's starting a business or, you know, private equity or whatever. Just be very clear on who's doing what and why they're doing that, who's doing what.
Yeah. Okay. That's do you know John Pennington?
No.
He's the co-founder of Bridge Investment Group,
Okay.
50 billion family of real estate funds.
Oh, yes, I do. His son is Jordan.
Bridger. No, that's Paul Hutchinson.
Oh, Hutchinson. Okay, then I don't know. Okay.
Oh, so wait, you know Paul?
I met Paul. I met him through one of Jordan's things. Yeah.
Okay, you know Jordan.
Yeah, I do. In fact, I've got something on my email right now that's Jordan introing me to somebody because he always does, which is great. I love it. So
He yeah, I have to have him on the show soon. But his father came on the show a couple weeks ago.
yeah, I know. I saw that. I watched.
You saw that
I watched it. Yeah.
When I asked him to be my mentor, and he was like, "Okay, kid." So his business partner that co-founded Bridge Investment Group with him is John Pennington.
Okay.
And then when my father was like, "It's time to start a fund. You have to start a fund," and I was like, "I don't know how to do every role in the fund perfectly." Mr. Pennington sent the story in for the book, for the bestseller book.
Yeah. You mean this book?
You got it?
I did.
If you bring it next week, a bunch of the authors are going to be at the event to sign their parts.
Oh, cool. I'll bring it.
So you have to flip, I think, depending on which edition you have, like to page 313.
Okay.
He sent that story in, and then I sent him a thank you note for giving me clarity on how to start the fund. He was like, you just have to, he takes a very different approach. He was like, you just have to do someone's job good enough until you have the money to hire someone better to come in and do it.
Right. Yeah.
So that was, I was like completely choked. There's all this family pressure. And then he sent that in and it was like, that's what made me say like, okay, yeah, I can do it. I can do that. But
I just find myself, my pushback on that would be, I find myself that it's easier to find the money to pay the right person than it is for me to do the work at all.
yeah,
That's the way it goes. That's my counter argument to that position. I get it, like totally, but like I do think that if you can get the right person in sooner than later, like go for it. Get the right.
you're going to make a lot of money. Oh, yeah, and I think when they were starting out, capital was not as easily accessible as it is today.
Yeah.
So like with my fund, we have the first 5 roles that we're trying to fill with the founding team, rather than me trying to do those roles myself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I just found that things move so much faster if you get the right people in sooner than later. It's just more, it's just more efficient, just like time wise. It's, you don't burn as much time futzing around.
Yeah. And getting people in that move confidently in those roles.
Right.
Okay, so this is a fan favorite question. What are some tools and tactics that you use to manage your time and teams effectively?
Tools and tactics. I'm not a good manager of people. I'm a good like rah culture guy. Actually like assigning people things to do, I'm not great at, like to actually get things done. And this is something I've learned. So my trick has been that I have a right-hand man named Brad, and Brad is an MBA and an engineer and years and years experience at Johnson & Johnson and Abbott Labs and like big companies like heavy duty process and stuff. And Brad is involved with all of my businesses. Brad is essentially the other half of my brain, right? And like I do the kind of visioning and like, hey, what are we going to do? And like all the great things. And then Brad takes that and makes it real and makes it concrete. So just because I know who I am, having that person who can play that other side of the equation like so closely with me, and Brad and I have known each other now for 12, 13 years. That's been my trick for myself.
Okay. I mean, people are usually one or the other.
Exactly.
What is the best way for those who want to get involved with your fund, or you have an accelerator as well?
Yeah, so I do work through 1909 here in downtown West Palm Beach. They're great. I also have worked with EO Entrepreneurial Organization, EO Accelerator as well. And I'm also at the Harvard Entrepreneur in Residence program. So I'm one of the entrepreneurs in residence. And so I work, so basically those three things is kind of how I connect with people who are building stuff, or people just reach out to me directly or through somebody. Like I get connections all the time. So
Through
you know,
LinkedIn. They can reach out to you through LinkedIn.
LinkedIn is not great because I don't check it that often. Although I think my marketing team is actually going to be looking at it now because we just got like, we should probably look at your LinkedIn once in a while. I would tell people to email me, dan@cloinecapital.com, and then it comes directly to me.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Yeah. Don't be shy about it either, because I'm super friendly and I always like to hear what people are up to, because I've made my best relationships from people who have just reached out and we started talking. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything else you wanted to cover, or?
I don't think so. Yeah, if anybody wants to reach out to me, well, I talk to anybody about anything. I love it. And so, if they're friendly enough, I have a guest condo right around the corner here that I bought. So people come and hang out with me, and they stay at the condo for free. We walk and we talk. We have our philosophical conversations, and I always just love to do that with anybody, just because I got nothing else to do, I guess. I don't know. What else is there? So
there is no doubt that you grew up in Chicago. Like, Chicago people are so friendly. A New Yorker would be like, you can email 5 of my assistants. One of them will get you to run a background check and decide if you can talk to me. You're like, I have a spare condo over there. Come on and visit.
Yeah, now you hit it right on the head. It's a very Midwestern thing, and I do consider myself still, despite all my time on the East Coast, a Midwesterner at heart. So. Oh
no, you totally are. I'm the ice queen, and here you are, like Mr. Sunshine.
Good. If we make a good pair, then we can hang out together and meet somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, someone will hand you a drink, and I'll be like, "Where did that come from?" And you're like, "Thank you."
Awesome, I love it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in, guys, and I will see you on the next episode. If not, offline at one of the events in New England this summer. Bye.
Peace.